You're crouched at the edge of the fire, and the sun is almost gone. 3 people walked out this morning to hunt. Only 2 came back. Nobody says his name. Nobody looks toward the tree line. And somewhere in your chest, a feeling is rising that you don't have a word for yet. But every human after you will. Here's the problem nobody talks about when we imagine prehistoric life. We picture the hunt. We picture the fire, the meat, the celebration. We almost never picture the moment after, when someone doesn't make it back, and the group has to decide what that means. Not just practically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. Because a missing hunter isn't just a missing person. It's a hole torn into the fabric of the only safety net that exists. Think about what a small band of early humans actually was. 20, maybe 30 people. No police, no hospitals, no government record of who was born, who died, who simply vanished into the grass one afternoon and never walked out again. Every single person in that group was a load-bearing wall. Lose one, and the whole structure shifts. So when a hunter didn't return, it wasn't a footnote in the day. It was an event that reshaped the group's entire posture toward the world, sometimes for weeks. And the wild part? Anthropologists have spent decades piecing together what actually happened next. Through burial sites, through isolated tribes studied in the last century, through bone evidence that tells stories words never could. What they found doesn't look like grief the way we picture it. It looks stranger, colder in some places, warmer in others. And in certain cases, it looks like something we barely recognize as human behavior at all. So let's walk through it, hour by hour, because the way ancient humans handled a missing hunter reveals something about fear, loyalty, and survival that's still sitting quietly inside your own brain right now. The first thing that happened wasn't sadness. It was silence. Before anyone let themselves feel anything, the group had to figure out one brutal, practical question. Is he dead, or is he just late? And that question mattered more than you'd think. Because acting too early was dangerous, and acting too late could be fatal. Imagine you're back at camp. The light is dropping fast. 2 hunters return with a story that trails off in the middle. They got separated near the ridge. There were tracks, there was a sound, and then nothing. Do you send people out into the dark to search? Or do you wait, because sending more people out at night might mean losing them too? This is the first fracture point in ancient group psychology. Every band had to develop, almost instinctively, a threshold for risk. How much danger were they willing to accept to save one person? Too cautious, and you abandon someone who might still be alive, clinging to a ledge or nursing a wound. Too reckless, and you risk 2 or 3 more lives chasing a ghost. But here's what scientists actually found when they studied modern hunter-gatherer groups. The closest living mirror we have to Paleolithic bands. Among groups like the Hadza in Tanzania, researchers observed something remarkable. There's an almost ritualized waiting period before a full search begins. Not because people don't care, because panic gets people killed. The group forces itself into a kind of discipline, holding its fear at arm's length, just long enough to think clearly. That discipline isn't instinct. It's culture. It's a lesson passed down through catastrophe after catastrophe, generation after generation, until wait and assess became baked into the group's unconscious rulebook. And that rulebook is still running in you today. Ever notice how your body reacts differently to a text that goes unanswered for an hour versus a call that goes straight to voicemail during a storm? That gap between mild worry and full alarm, that's not modern anxiety. That's 40,000 years of risk calibration, still firing in your nervous system. Once the group decided the hunter truly wasn't coming back on his own, the real work began. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because the search wasn't driven purely by love. It was driven by need. Ancient bands tracked people the same way they tracked animals, reading disturbed grass, broken branches, drag marks, blood. A missing hunter left a trail, and reading that trail required skill that took years to build. So the people sent to search weren't chosen because they were closest to the missing man emotionally. They were chosen because they were the best trackers alive. Grief had to wait its turn behind competence. Picture it. You're one of 2 trackers moving through unfamiliar terrain as the light fails completely. You're reading signs most people wouldn't even notice. A scuffed stone, a snapped twig at an odd angle, the absence of birds where there should be birds. Every step forward is a step deeper into territory that might hold whatever took him: a cave lion, a rival group, a ravine hidden by fog. And here's the part that should unsettle you. Evidence from Paleolithic and Mesolithic sites suggests search parties sometimes never returned either. Multiple burial clusters, dated to roughly the same period, in the same region, hint at group deaths tied to a single triggering event. Not a battle, not a plague, but something that started with one person going missing and ended with several. Loss compounded on loss. A missing hunter could become a missing search party. A missing search party could become a wounded, starving group limping into winter without enough hands to hunt, gather, or defend the camp. This is the part modern retellings of Cavemen almost always skip: how catastrophically fragile these communities actually were. One bad afternoon could unravel months of careful survival. Now here's a reframe that changes everything you thought you understood about this. We assume ancient humans were hardened to death, that losing someone was just routine, background noise in a brutal world. But here's what scientists actually found in the archaeological record, and it flips that assumption completely. Burial sites from tens of thousands of years ago show extraordinary care taken with the dead. Bodies arranged deliberately. Red ochre pigment covering remains, likely symbolizing blood or life or something we can't fully translate. Flowers, tools, ornaments placed beside the deceased. Offerings that took time, thought, and resources the group could barely spare. This wasn't indifference. This was ritual. This was people trying, in the only language they had, to say this mattered. So when a hunter went missing and was never found, no body to bury, no ritual to perform, it created a wound that never properly closed. Anthropologists studying grief across cultures have found that ambiguous loss without a body, without confirmation, is often more psychologically devastating than a clear death. The mind can't finish the story. It keeps searching, long after the search parties have gone home. Does that sound familiar? It should. Modern families of missing persons describe the exact same suspended agony, an inability to grieve fully, an inability to move on, trapped in a loop of hope and dread that never resolves. That ache isn't a modern invention. It's ancient. It's baked into how human attachment works, and it's been breaking hearts the same way since before we had language sophisticated enough to name it. What you're about to hear was hidden from history books for a long time, buried under the assumption that prehistoric people were too primitive for complex emotional or social responses. But the evidence tells a very different story, and it starts with a question almost nobody asks. What happened to everything the missing hunter left behind? His tools, his share of food he'd have hunted, his place by the fire, his role within the group's social structure. Maybe he was the best spear thrower. Maybe he was someone's partner. Maybe he was the only person who knew where a particular water source was during dry season. All of that knowledge, all of that function, simply vanished with him, and the group had to absorb it, redistribute it, survive around the hole he left. This is where ancient human behavior starts looking eerily familiar. Researchers studying small-scale societies have documented something called social role redistribution. Basically, a kind of unspoken triage where the group quietly reassigns the missing person's responsibilities to others almost immediately, often before grief has even been processed. It sounds cold. It isn't. It's survival wearing the mask of practicality. Because a group that stops functioning to mourn properly is a group that starves. Think about how uncomfortably this mirrors modern workplaces after someone unexpectedly leaves or dies. The meetings continue. The tasks get reassigned. Someone else takes over the account, the project, the desk. People feel guilty about how quickly life moves on. But it's not because nobody cared. It's because systems, ancient or modern, are built to keep running, even while individuals inside them are breaking. Now here's where the story takes a darker turn, and it's the piece most documentaries leave out entirely. Not every hunter who never returned was actually lost to the wilderness. Some were lost to something far more disturbing, their own group. Anthropological and ethnographic research into small band societies has documented a grim but consistent pattern. In extreme conditions, famine, resource scarcity, deep distrust, a hunter who became a liability or who threatened the group's cohesion sometimes didn't come back from a hunt because he wasn't meant to. Disputes over food, over a mate, over leadership, occasionally ended not in confrontation at the fire, but in silence out in the field, where there were no witnesses and no rules. This is uncomfortable to sit with, but it's important, because it means the phrase "he never returned" carried a double meaning in ancient communities. Sometimes tragedy, and sometimes something closer to an unspoken verdict. A conflict resolved the only way it could be, out where the group's social contract didn't reach. Does this sound impossibly dark for people we usually imagine as simple, huddled around fires? It should make you pause, because it reveals that violence within the group, not just against outside threats, has likely always been part of the human survival toolkit. Not common, not celebrated, but present quietly, as a last resort when the alternative was letting one dangerous or destabilizing person threaten everyone else's survival. And this connects to something deeply modern, even if it's uncomfortable to admit. Every society, ancient or current, eventually reaches a point where it quietly decides someone's continued presence is too costly to tolerate. We don't send people into the wilderness anymore, but we still isolate people. We still exile them socially, professionally, digitally. The mechanism has softened. The underlying calculation hasn't disappeared. But let's step back from the darkest edge for a moment, because most missing hunters weren't victims of the group. They were victims of the world. And the world, 40,000 years ago, was relentless. Consider the sheer number of ways to die that we've simply engineered out of existence. A twisted ankle miles from camp could become fatal within days, through infection, through exposure, through the inability to outrun a predator. A single wrong step near a riverbank could mean drowning in currents stronger than it looked. A large predator, a cave hyena, a short-faced bear, a saber-toothed cat, could take a hunter in seconds, leaving almost nothing behind to find. There was no rescue helicopter, no signal fire visible for 50 miles, no way to call for help beyond your own voice, and your own voice could attract exactly the kind of attention you didn't want. Bioarchaeological evidence, heel fractures, embedded projectile marks, bite patterns on ancient bones, paint a picture of a world where survival wasn't the default outcome of a hunt. It was the exception that people fought hard every single time to earn. Every hunter who walked into grass carried the quiet knowledge that this trip might be the one where the odds finally caught up, and that knowledge shaped something profound in early human psychology, the birth of ritual before danger. Evidence suggests pre-hunt rituals, markings, chants, and offerings weren't superstition in the way we dismiss it today. They were psychological armor, a way to steady trembling hands before walking into uncertainty, a way to say goodbye, quietly just in case. Here's a question worth sitting with. How different is that, really, from a modern soldier's pre-deployment ritual or an athlete's routine? Before stepping onto a field where injury is a real possibility, we've inherited the instinct to ritualize danger, even when the danger looks completely different now. The body still wants to prepare for the possibility of not coming back. Now, the final escalation, the piece of the story that changes how you should think about the entire history of human survival. When a hunter never returned, and enough time passed without resolution, ancient groups eventually did something that feels almost unbearably human. They created a story, not a lie. Exactly, a way to make an unbearable absence mean something. Anthropologists studying oral traditions across isolated cultures have found strikingly consistent patterns. Missing people, especially those lost to wilderness without a body, often be folded into the group's mythology. He wasn't just gone. He became something, a spirit in the forest, a guardian on the mountain, a warning told to children about which paths not to walk alone. The unresolved loss didn't disappear. It transformed into meaning the group could actually carry. This is quite possibly one of the earliest origins of storytelling itself. Not entertainment, not decoration, a survival mechanism for processing trauma that had no other outlet. When you can't bury a body, you bury the story instead, and you visit that grave every time the tale gets retold around the fire. And here's the reveal that should genuinely unsettle you, because it's been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Some researchers argue that this exact mechanism, transforming unresolved loss into myth, warning, and shared narrative, is the psychological blueprint behind almost every ghost story, cautionary legend, and don't go into the woods alone tale that has ever existed in human culture. Every culture on Earth, independently, developed stories about people who went somewhere and never came back, and became something else out there. That's not coincidence. That's 40,000 years of unresolved grief, still echoing through campfire stories, still showing up in the movies you watch, still whispering underneath every, based on true events, thriller that gives you chills. Think about how many modern stories follow this exact shape. A person goes missing in the wilderness. The search fails. Years later, locals still talk about strange sounds near where it happened. We treat this as pure fiction, pure entertainment. But the emotional architecture underneath it is ancient, real, and deeply human, built by people who actually lost someone in the dark and needed someone to put that pain. So when you strip all of this back, what actually happened when an ancient hunter never returned wasn't one event. It was a cascade, practical calculation, dangerous searching, ritualized grief, quiet redistribution of survival, and sometimes, buried underneath all of it, judgment delivered in silence, far from the fire. All of it driven by the same forces that still govern human behavior today. The terror of losing what keeps you safe, the guilt of moving forward anyway, and the deep, stubborn need to make meaning out of an absence that refuses to explain itself. And maybe that's the most disturbing thought of all. We like to believe we've evolved past this, past the vulnerability, past the primal fear of someone simply not coming home. But strip away the phones, the hospitals, the search and rescue helicopters, and you're left with the exact same moment that hollowed out that camp 40,000 years ago. Someone you depend on walks out the door, and somewhere in the back of your mind, quiet and ancient, a part of you is already counting the hours until you know whether they're coming back.